Hey everybody, this is Andre here with the Kevin Breeze channel, and in this video, we're going to be going over some pros and cons of the LG K22. You can get this phone factory unlocked for GSM carriers, and it actually just made it to the US markets with Boost Mobile. To get some more information on pricing and availability of the phone, definitely check the link in the description. That'll take you to all of that. That being said, let's get started. So the first pro of this phone is its large display. Now this phone has a 6.2-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 271, an aspect ratio of 19:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of 81.7%. Now having a large display is definitely beneficial for content consumption. If you're doing something like watching videos or playing games or just browsing the web, you're definitely going to benefit from having a larger screen because you're going to be able to see everything a lot better. And not only is this display decently large, but the quality is actually pretty good too. Right now, I have the brightness at 100%, and the colors, despite being just an LCD display in 720p, are still really good. For such an entry-level phone, you're definitely getting a good deal with such a good display for content consumption and other types of activities that will benefit from having a good display. Now the first con of this phone is it has no fingerprint scanner or face unlock. This is pretty unfortunate because those are really fast and easy ways to unlock your phone, and most phones nowadays do have them, so it's definitely a disadvantage that this phone doesn't have them. That being said, there are some alternative ways to putting in your PIN to unlock this phone. One of them being a pattern. I think that is a little bit better than putting in a PIN because you don't actually have to type. You can just drag your finger in. You can usually do that in your pocket pretty easily once you get familiar with the pattern you set for it. There's also a password, which I don't think is very convenient at all. I wouldn't use that one, but at least there are a couple different alternatives. That being said, I still think it is very unfortunate and inconvenient that there's no fingerprint scanner or face unlock, as that's a pretty common feature. Right now, I do have this phone set to just unlock by swiping up. There's not even a PIN or password or anything because I just dislike putting in a PIN that much. So if you're one of those people who does need a fast, convenient, easy way to unlock your phone, and you actually do like to use a screen lock of some sort, then definitely keep this in mind because this is going to be a big disadvantage for you. Now another pro for this phone is that it has a macro camera. Now even though macro cameras are pretty common, they're not quite as common as an ultra-wide camera and a lot of other camera features, and seeing them on super entry-level phones is actually a little bit more on the uncommon side. So it was nice to see that this one does actually have a macro camera. Now this is a quick example of a photo that was taken with the macro camera. Now it is actually very decent as well. So not only are we getting a macro camera with this entry-level phone, but we're also getting one that's really usable. You can actually use this in a real life situation and it won't be too bad. So that's great to see. But on the subject of the camera of this phone, this does bring us to our next con, which is besides the macro camera, this phone is pretty featureless. Now to give you a full rundown of the camera specs for this phone, it has a 5 megapixel front facing camera, a 13 megapixel rear camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera, and that's it. There's no ultra wide camera, and I think that ultra wide cameras are more common and more useful than a macro camera. So it's a little surprising and a little disappointing that this phone has a macro camera but doesn't have an ultra wide camera. I don't know why they wouldn't just include both. Another thing to point out about this phone is that it has no portrait mode. Now, aside from the macro camera and ultra wide camera, which don't always appear on every single phone, portrait mode is even more common than either of those features. Almost every phone nowadays does have portrait mode, and you really do expect it to be on the camera of a smartphone these days. So that is definitely surprising that they don't actually have portrait mode on this phone. And it's a little disappointing because it makes the camera a lot less usable. No matter what the situation is, you're bound to be in a situation at least once in a while where portrait mode would come in handy. So not having it is definitely a disadvantage. Now that being said, another pro for this phone is that even though the camera is very lacking in features, It does take really good quality pictures for what it is. Now this is a picture that was actually taken with the LG K22, and as you can see, sure, it's not the quality of a super high-end phone, but the image is actually decently crisp. The exposure is a little bit off, but not too bad. It is decently bright without being too obnoxious, and the colors are really well balanced. So really, if you do want to take a nice picture every now and then, with this phone you definitely can. Another thing that's really nice about the camera of this phone is its video mode. Now this phone is actually able to shoot video in 1080p in both the front camera and the rear camera. Now, although 1080p isn't normally a very special quality for videos, it is actually pretty notable that a super entry-level phone like this one is able to shoot in 1080p not only in the rear camera, but also the front camera. Because usually the front-facing camera of any phone, let alone a super entry-level one like this, is gonna be a lot lower quality than the rear camera, and it's usually not gonna be able to shoot the same quality in videos. Most of the time, entry-level phones like this one are only able to shoot in 720p in the rear camera, let alone the front camera. So it's really nice to see that this phone can shoot 1080p video in both the rear camera and the front-facing cameras. Now another con for this phone is its processor. This phone is getting 2 GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 215 processor. We ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone a little while ago, and it came back with a single core score of 100 and a multi-core score of 352. Now this is quite possibly one of the lowest Geekbench 5 benchmark scores I've ever seen. This is a very weak processor that's really not going to be able to do a whole lot. When you're browsing the web, the phone is definitely going to be on the slower side. When you're consuming content, you will be able to do stuff like video streaming, but it might not be very fast. It's probably going to load the videos a little slow. You're definitely not going to be able to do anything like gaming or video editing. If you try to do that kind of stuff, especially with games that have decent graphics, they're definitely going to run slow and most likely crash on you. Same thing with video editing. It's going to be really tough to render a video if you're editing it on the phone with such a weak processor. So really the main thing this processor is actually going to be good for is just basic activities like sending text messages, making calls, maybe a little bit of web browsing, and then some occasional content consumption. But again, it's really not going to be very fast. To give you an idea of what this processor looks like in action, I'm going to do a little demonstration. We're going to start by opening Google Chrome. Now we're going to go to a web page. As you can see, it's definitely not the fastest. We're going to try one more. So overall, for web browsing, the phone's really not that bad, but I definitely wouldn't go any further than that. If you're doing something like gaming or photo and video editing, I would definitely consider a higher end phone. Like even the LG K51, for example, a related phone to this one that's a little bit higher end than this is going to be better for more heavy content consumption. It might be able to do a little bit of photo editing, some gaming, and that sort of thing, because this processor is definitely on the lower end and really not meant for those more intense activities. The final pro for this phone is that it has a headphone jack. Now, more manufacturers are doing away with headphone jacks and other types of things like that, so it's really nice to see this one does have a good old-fashioned 3.5mm headphone jack right at the top. Although Bluetooth speakers and headphones are getting more and more popular, it is nice if you consume content without using your phone speaker or wireless devices to be able to use a good old-fashioned pair of normal wired headphones from time to time. The final con for this phone is that it has a very small battery. Now this phone only has a 3000 milliamp hour battery. This is definitely on the smaller side, and as the battery degrades, you're going to notice it a lot more than you would with a phone with a larger battery, just because this battery is so small. This is also going to give you far less battery life than other phones that have larger batteries. Compared to a similar phone in this level, like the Motorola Moto G Play, this phone definitely does have a very small battery because the Motorola Moto G Play actually has a 5000 milliamp hour battery. And that phone is at a similar price range to this phone. So in comparison, as far as battery life goes, you can definitely do better. But this is pros and cons for the LG K22. Again, if you want any more information about the pricing and availability of the device, definitely check the link in the description. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next video.